Starting. Hello. Um, so today we're going to talk about state management in React, and we're going to talk about a new state management library that Mike wrote, and he recently started to work more with React, and I guess like more professionally, and and he had some questions about uh, how did you say it, like the vibe of React management.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
will
What are the
let you take over.
attitudes?
Uh-huh.
What are people saying about different libraries? What is there, and what has the field of state management been like in React? Like what have the options been? What have been the common opinions about them? Yeah, I don't know because I've barely paid attention to React so until now. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I wonder what made you paid attention now.
Um, well, when React first came out, I looked at it and I was like, huh, interesting, but it didn't look that interesting to me. It was fine. But it looked, class components didn't look very great to me. Set state, it seemed kind of boilerplatey, which is kind of ironic from, an Angular developer, but it didn't look like that much better. Um, and so I'll just is it okay if I just tell kind of my experience of like
Sure, yeah.
React and state management in React?
Uh-huh.
Because to me they're kind of the same. Because React is all about state management. I think even though it's just like a rendering library, um, state management has been a big topic in React. Because I feel like there are always just dozens of state management libraries popping in and out of existence in React, and so I knew about Redux because that one was big enough that it's used in Angular. So I learned all about unidirectional data flow. I watched the original React talk where they introduced Flux. Um, and yeah, I wasn't too interested in React until hooks. When they announced hooks, and I saw the the highlighting by state and how,
Separation of concerns, kind of,
yes,
right?
separation of concerns, and how it became more co-located with hooks. I was like, okay, that is awesome. And I like functional programming. So the class components, it's not pure functions with hooks, but it's less boilerplate, I think. So at that point, I started being interested again. And I knew that after Redux, there was kind of mobx, and there was also sort of like interest in Arcs.js for a little bit. And then when hooks came out, I thought that maybe everyone was saying like, okay, hooks are enough. And then I actually saw an article saying hooks aren't enough. You still should use Redux. And so I was surprised that people are still doing Redux. I thought that React community was just kind of having a different fad every year and kind of moving from library to library. But I'm surprised that Redux is actually still pretty big. Um, and yeah, after hooks, I also have used TanStack query. And so my first project that I did full time in React was TanStack query, and that was like 9 months ago ish. And we didn't use any like official state management library, and I don't think we really needed it. So that's all I know about state and how it's managed in React. Basically, I know how to use hooks and stuff, and I know Redux, but I know that there are so many libraries I just have no idea about, and I'm not even sure how to really categorize them. So that's what I'd like to learn about.
Right. And I think you got the gist of it. When you
Really?
first asked about it, and like I tried to kind of like write down kind of like the history and like how the how the best practices, right? How the recommended approach was changing over time. I think you hit like most of the thing that I wrote down. Uh,
Okay.
and it's funny that you mentioned that like once hooks were released, everyone's like, yeah, we don't need anything like anymore.
Yeah.
And okay, so I just want to kind of like quickly go through that thing that I wrote.
Okay.
So first of all, is that I don't remember where I wrote all the links. Maybe this one. Uh, Basically, uh, Jack Harrington. I
Hmm.
hope I'm pronouncing this right. He kind of like categorized state libraries. Oh, we have our first hi in the chat. Hi, Nicola.
Hello.
I hope that's how you pronounce it. That's how I would pronounce it. So he he wrote this like that. I think I first heard kind of like this terminology from Ken Dots, but I don't
Oh,
know the like the the full history of it. But I tried to kind of like remember what was the like chronological order. So what I did is in Google you can just select like time for the like search results,
oh
and I
yeah.
just like went through the years and like checked what is like the best practice.
Awesome.
So it's like lagging kind of like a year or more behind of
Okay.
like how it actually happened, but it actually led me to kind of like restore everything. And it's funny though, like the first point is like Redux,
Hmm.
right? And before Redux, there was Flux, and at our company at the time, we thought that Redux is kind of like too, how do I say it? We thought that Redux introduced too much
Indirection.
indirection, probably the best way to say it, and we
Indirection.
used
Yeah.
Flux itself, which
So yeah,
uh
that I was wondering about that. Like, how popular was Flux before Redux? Because I know that for me, it's kind of like a prequel, like or like a prologue. I don't know, some backstory of Redux. I didn't really know anything about Flux,
uh,
or
I
if people
think
used it.
what happened is that when Flux was like the presentation happened, either it wasn't like released right away or people kind of like didn't get the message that it was released. And
Oh,
I just remember the feeling of like Flux is like an approach but not an implementation. So
I've that rings a bell.
uh,
I think I've heard that before.
right. So it was kind of like never it was never a thing.
Okay,
So maybe
but
like for
but
the
your company was using just a Flux pattern,
yeah, so
like the
maybe
actual
like in the
Flux library.
first year or so, it was kind of like comparable, right? So it's like $50,000 in like 2015, but quickly kind of like no one used Flux for real.
This graph is actually really interesting.
Uh-huh.
Look at it. Is it really that different? Like in 2023, is there that much more web development activity than in 2016? It
Sure, yeah.
Well, the other thing is React was new back then, so there could have been other technologies that were a little higher.
I think it's just maybe because Redux is also used like not only in React, and it's
Yeah.
also like once you have a kind of like server in production, you're going to keep it
Hmm.
forever.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like accumulating.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I would
So
think
so that's
so.
interesting. That's what I thought. I kind of thought that Flux was um like not real in a sense. Like
Yeah,
it was more like an inspiration than
yeah,
an
yeah.
actual.
But it was an actual thing, and I can't probably like find any code for from that period, but it was a thing, and we thought that like Redux was over.
Overkill.
kind of overkill and like kind of like bloated and boilerplate and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
one other thing is that it had kind of like worse TypeScript story, which was really important for us. So we at the time we were using Knockout.js, and we had a lot of kind of like undefined is not a function stuff because
Oh,
it uses like string templates,
huh.
kind of like in AngularJS, I guess. You just write like on click like this function. I hope it exists, right?
Yeah.
And we were like, okay, we have to do something. We have to migrate to TypeScript. And while once we kind of like started doing that, we rewrote kind of like core part of our application to TypeScript. And I was like, okay, maybe we should use React as well.
Oh, so you were doing TypeScript with Knockout, or wait, did you say Backbone? What was it?
Knockout.
Knockout.
Yeah,
Oh,
Knockout is
wow.
the one that Ryan Carniato likes.
Yeah, so you understand him and his background more than I do then.
Yeah. And
That's pretty cool.
the funny thing is that I have like a Code Mentor account, and I just like look at the postings that are happening there, and it's like funny to see like, hey, like I have like Erlang question or like Astra questions, like, oh, so like actual people use it. And
Hmm.
the funniest thing was when I saw knockout question. It was like, hey, I need to set up knockout, like all the documentation doesn't work. And it's like, of course it doesn't. It's like it wasn't updated in 10 years. And yeah, so here was a guy who's like, yeah, I'm learning knockout, like we don't use npm modules. It's all kind of like TypeScript namespaces. So it was
Oh,
very close to my heart.
wow. So you were really, really early in TypeScript then.
Yeah,
You probably learned TypeScript before I did.
maybe,
I
but
I didn't learn until 2017, so
yeah, yeah, that's all of that is like 2013, and
wow.
yeah,
That's awesome.
thanks. Uh, it was different thing then. It was really scary. And anyway, so here's the point about like, yeah, you just have strings and you just hope that this thing exists.
Hmm.
Um, and we were trying to write as much code in TypeScript as possible and kind of like and use like knockout templating less so that we don't have those problems.
Yeah.
And then we started talking about like React and Flux and stuff. And because TypeScript at that time didn't support JSX, it was like much more important for us to use TypeScript than JSX. So we use React for like first few years without JSX.
Wow. Oh, did you use like Hyperscript or something?
Yeah, so I tried to like send screenshots how it looked on Twitter, and basically it's like the React documentary that just happened. First talk, what is it like JSConf? Okay, that's the Pete Hunt one. There was one before that.
Yeah, that's the one I always used to think was the first talk.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's the first that was like accepted, right?
Yeah. I didn't even know the first one really existed until I saw that React documentary. So,
Okay, I don't know how to find it yet, but um, in the first, oh yeah, Fax.js, actually kind of like heard Fax.js like in 2013, but I don't know if anyone used it. Yeah, the thing is that so here how it looks. It was so
oh.
hard to find like this example, but it is in the first React talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I saw this after the documentary. I went back and watched this. And yeah, I saw that. I was like, huh, that doesn't look very fun.
Right. And this is how you do it. So like DOM was an object that was like in main React. package, and at some time I think they moved it to a separate package first, and then they deprecated it or something. But
Yeah.
it wasn't like hyperscript, but it was real close. And this is what we wrote, and like TypeScript would give you autocomplete and all that stuff for this syntax.
Wow, that's awesome. I had no idea people were doing that. That's
Right.
cool.
Okay. I'm like I forgot a bit. It was okay. So we started with the idea that Redux wasn't a thing right away. Flux was more popular for the first few months, let's say. Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So Dan did this presentation that was mentioned in React documentary about like time traveling, and like
Oh yeah.
basically the idea was that DevTools for React happened and DevTools for Redux happened, and it felt like this is the future. You can like right click on any component, you can see what props are, what state is, and how it was like changing over time. So, and this is like a funny bit of history of like in 2016. So Redux was like a thing already,
Hmm.
but like barely a thing, right? So it's like it was just becoming like more popular than Flux.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, where is it? No, I lost it. Okay, here. Yeah. So at the time, the discussion was basically like separating the state, uh, like thinking about how props are different from state,
Hmm.
how global state is different from local state. I think eventually out of that discussion, there was, yeah, it was a bit later, but like this whole smart and dumb components idea kind of like
Okay.
realized.
Yeah, a lot of these ideas filtered into the Angular community, and yeah, we had smart and dumb components. We talked about global and local state. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
And I think the important thing about state, and this is what I usually use when I explain like what's the difference between like a framework or library, right? So why React was claiming to be a library is that in early days, uh, so first of all, React was probably like smaller than jQuery at the time, or probably around the same like bundle size. And
Hmm.
if you have PHP website on a WordPress, you probably are sending 5 copies of jQuery anyway. So it's like adding. So now it's like when you have Svelte and Astro, it's like, hey, React is so big. How are you even like sending that big of a bundle? But at the time, no one used mobile phones, and desktops were kind of like fast enough, and they had enough memory and all that stuff. So like bundle size wasn't like even a thing. No one would like, yeah, it was like bad if you have more than 5 versions of jQuery, but not kind of like before that.
Mm.
So it was not a controversial opinion to say, hey, if you have a one button on your whole website that needs to have a state, use React, which
Yeah,
is a slightly controversial for Angular, because like your whole app should be Angular. You're not going to use like Angular for one button. It's like, how do
yeah.
you even like bootstrap it and all that stuff?
It wants to own everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But for React, it was like perfectly valid use case. It says, sure, yeah, just the same way as you download jQuery from CDN, just download React from CDN, and it's like just use it for one button. So
Hmm.
it wasn't a controversial opinion at all. And this is how it was used in Facebook. They had their whole server-side render app, and React components were kind of like put here and there, what we would like in modern days call like
Yeah.
islands, right? And just it kind of like became bigger. until you have like server-side rendering, until you have like your whole app consumed by React, until you have like a router and all that stuff, you are fine with just using React for one button.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it was like fine for you, for this button to get state from outside of React completely. That's why React didn't care about state as much, because they
Oh,
didn't have enough state in React kind of like to begin with.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you have like a new server props, like a server sent you like a request, this like button has like 13 likes. You're getting this update from outside of React. You already have your backbone or whatnot, like some other mechanism where this data is stored, or Flux, right? And you just call the render method with new props. The render method that is like kind of like hidden now from in every framework,
Mm-hmm.
but like in Create React App, you can still like you can still see it. It's still there. Yeah. So
Yeah.
just imagine that Facebook probably had all of its state outside of React, and they would just like call render method on the same kind of like node, just with new props. And this
Yeah, that
is
makes
why
sense.
React was a library. This is how it was used for a long time at Facebook, and they don't care what happens outside of Facebook. That's why for them, React is a library.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so
Okay. I think I
Redux
understand that.
was like a way to put state in React, which is more of a community project than like Facebook project. That's because
Yeah.
Facebook didn't use it this way. So that's kind of like 2016. That's probably when we started to use JSX or something. That's where React became like a not like an experiment. Haha, look at them trying to put XML inside of my JavaScript, but
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of like becoming a thing.
Real solution. Higher order components.
Yeah,
I remember hearing about them and not really, there's kind of just a little over my head. Well, I could understand it and then I would forget what it was.
right.
But recently I watched a talk
Uh-huh.
that was given in Arizona about not using higher order components. And I think it was a guy, was it the guy who created React Router? No, it was, I think his first name was Michael. I can't remember.
There is Michael Jackson who is
Yes.
doing remix and React Router.
I think I think he gave a talk at a conference in Arizona or something
Uh-huh.
where it was like really influential where basically everybody decided not to use, was it Mexicans? Mixins? Oh no, first it was Mixins
Right.
and then it was high order components, right? And then it was render props. And then everybody moved to render props instead.
Right. So
Right?
what I'm going to present is that higher order components are technique, but I'm going to explain what they were trying to solve.
Is
So at
is
first, huh?
um it's kind of weird to talk about them in the context of state management, but I assume you're going to explain
Yes, yes.
it. Okay. All
so
right.
so first thing that like happened with React, it had like should component update, which is
Mhm.
in modern React that's going to be react.memo, not
Mhm.
use memo, but React memo.
Yeah. You wrap
And
the whole thing in.
yeah, and in some sense, that's where dependency arrays for use effects or something like that come into play. That's kind of like the similar idea. And at the time, you would have basically like half of your components would have this thing. It's a life. I almost said lifestyle. Uh, uh,
That too. But
what is it? Life cycle?
life cycle hook.
Yeah, it's a life cycle method on
Oh.
the same way as like new props or on mount and stuff. And you would add this thing that if it returns false, it will stop rendering your component of like, hey, probably like this component doesn't need rendering. I learned a bit of Angular recently, so I think it's called like something like on push or something. There's like a way
Oh,
to
yeah.
opt out of kind of like default change detection.
Yeah. Well, on push actually gets you to, yes.
Something like that.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
joke that when I say that I know
Yeah. It
Angular.
does shallow reference check on the inputs.
Right. So you would have like half of your components using this thing, and it's like, can we find a way to like not do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so this shallow compare is like a library function. It just checks that new props. So like this dot
Oh,
props is the same as new props, and this dot state is the same as next state. So
okay.
that's what it would do, and that's where mixins came in. They're like, okay, if you have a mixin that defines on mount, we will call on mount. So imagine that everyone's like, oh, can I write a mixin that will go to like API and call it on mount? And if I have the same kind of like user information or something, right? So like all of my components need to have like a username. You
Mm-hmm.
can put username mixin in every class that uses it, and it will go and like add on mount hook, and it will go and like call set state or this
Okay.
dot username, like set it to something. So it just
Yeah.
depends on how are you going to do it. But this was the way, instead of like using React query, right? Instead of having a hook, you would use something like that. And
Okay.
higher order components, I think that the like solution, right? So this article is like mixins considered harmful. Solution:
Yeah.
higher order
Yeah.
components. And higher order components, I think I was like showing some article. Uh, Higher order components, they will implement those hooks. They will have on mount or like some other stuff, and they will encapsulate some kind of like, in terms of like separation and concerns, it is almost like a custom hook.
Mm.
It is a thing that has a life cycle. So the same way as you use effect to like to connect to something, to like to render something on mount and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, this higher order component will have its own. I don't know why it's so problematic for me, but life
Cycle.
cycle hooks, and then it will have its own internal state, but you are not going to see it. You will only see it as like props that are passed to you. So where is it?
Okay.
Where is it?
So
Where's
it
the
like
solution?
obscures or
It's not an
encapsulates.
obscured, but it's more about encapsulating. So where's oh no, we need to do this whole Zoom dance. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Well, we got to do what we got to do. So
yeah. Okay. So, I don't see like good examples that kind of like that can quickly explain my point, but something like that with subscription. So you have some like API thing or like browser size or whatnot, like thing that you can reuse,
mm-hmm.
and then this thing will just like give you kind of like part of the state
Part of
as a
state. Okay.
prop. Huh?
Okay. So it's like a way to share state.
You're not sharing it between, you're sharing logic, not the status of it.
Logic. Right. That makes
Mhm.
sense. Yeah. I was thinking about that because you're just wrapping a component. And so it becomes a component of itself. It's not actually sharing state.
Yes. And
Okay.
the answer for that part is context. And we're going to get there.
Okay.
So then they introduce this subscription function that takes your component and adds like a prop on it. So like in this case, adds like a components prop that if you use like this component instead of that component, this is kind of like a dumb component,
Hmm.
and this is kind of like smart component. So
Yeah.
this dumb component now, it doesn't do any logic to manage subscription. It just gets it as a prop, and
Yeah.
you can reuse that logic or encapsulate that logic at least.
Yeah.
So
And that is appealing. Like just looking at that statement, it's
uh,
appealing. It looks simple.
right,
Yeah.
but like I'm sure it's like it never is, right? So
Right.
um, right, in context. And the context is, hey, I put my this like logic that encapsulates something as high as possible in a tree, and then I share it as a context. And then if I need username, I get it once. I call my like API event once, and this provider, it doesn't do any rendering. It only works with like adding basically like props, like setting a state for a context. And then if I have 10 components that need username, they just use it from a context. They don't kind of like touch that logic. But then you're like,
Mm.
okay, but what if I have 0 components that need user state? Can I like communicate it somehow so that's like, can I hook it so that this context has like on mount call, and it doesn't do it until you call on mount, and it gets more and more complicated, and
Okay.
that's how like the whole card house like crumbles.
Collapsed.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is like in 2016-ish,
Yeah, so
2017?
this is 2016, this is
Okay, so
React
2016,
article,
they're
yeah,
starting to try this pattern
higher order
with higher order
components, yeah,
components and context.
yeah.
Okay, and still Redux is big.
Sure,
It's been
and
big kind
it's
of the whole
only
time,
getting
right?
bigger.
Yeah. And then 2018
So, uh,
mobx.
right. So mobx, I think it kind of existed in 2015, I think, but uh, uh, this is when we tried. This is when we started to use React for our whole app. This is where we figured that it's a hassle to have all of that logic like in mixins or in higher order
Mm,
components and all that stuff. We're like,
yeah, props
okay,
and
I
all
think
that.
the solution is like redux, mobx, and so on.
Okay, so these external libraries started to really become important right here in
Kind of,
this
they
point.
solidified as kind of like a best practice. It's like,
Okay.
here's my thing of like trying to separate like dumb and smart components with this hooks and stuff, or with this higher order components stuff. And it's like, yeah, but like map store to props or whatever it was called, like the redux higher order component at the moment, like,
Hmm.
yeah, just use that one. Like, don't invent everything all the time. uh
Okay.
Hi Kasun. I hope that's how you pronounce it. And yes, so what did but it wasn't the only option, but I will kind of like skip it for for now, for
Okay.
simplicity. And we just realized that, yeah, you can create your own context, but like redux already does that for you. So we kind of like understood that all of our solutions are leading to writing worse version of Redux. And of
Okay.
course, there was basically like I never used mobx, and it looked too many decorators, too many kind of like
Oh, that sounds vaguely familiar. Did they actually use at symbols?
yeah, it's like add observable.
Oh yeah, I remember. Okay, that does sound right.
Where is it?
And was it
Maybe it's
the
not.
guy? I can't remember his name. That guy. Was he the one? Yeah, he called it bidirectional. Why is it
Right. So
bidirectional?
part about bidirectional is that um, so I'm missing here also like a part about immutable JS and like immer and stuff. That's
Okay.
where you're like, yeah, I could have Redux with global store, but I could also have like just a huge object. And if I update it using immutable functions, at that time, that basically means I have like store and I could do store update, and then it's like string user, comma, like first, comma, name. And it's like it will go to your database, search for a first user, and update the name for it. And it will only update kind of like it will reuse all the references apart from like the
Yeah.
minimal change. And if
Yeah.
you prop drill everything, if you just like pass that store all the time, if you have user number two, and it uses kind of like React memo. So it's like it has a way to just check, hey, is that the same reference? Yes, the same. So we don't need to do anything for second user because it wasn't changed. Does that kind of
Okay.
like play out? It wasn't
Yeah.
used kind of like that much, but it was a thing. And what was the biggest difference is like how do you, if you are editing right now like a third user, how do you communicate to that store that you're editing it, right? And
Hmm.
what mobx style like bidirectional things allowed you, if you have a reference to a user, you can just do user.name equals something.
Oh.
Yeah, so that was like that's
Okay.
what um,
So like knockout as well. That's what Ryan Carnetto mentions. Like
yeah,
the same thing can perform the update as read.
it's a similar idea. It's a bit different in
A little
technical
different.
details, but
Okay.
the thing is that like once you got a user, you can also like edit it. That's what gets it like bidirectional thing. And I think
Okay.
valtio is what does it right now. It's like a kind of like modern
Oh,
mobx
interesting.
with like cleaner syntax of like, hey, I have a user, I just do user.name equals something. And it's like a, for smaller apps, bidirectional things worked. So,
Yeah.
okay.
I haven't heard much about mobx. Is it kind of not really used much anymore?
It's an interesting question. We need to take a break for for Zoom reasons,
Okay. All right.
uh, and yeah, let me click my BRB.
Okay. Yep. Everything's good. Can you hear me?
Okay, so let's go back. So in terms of mobx, I never kind of like was interested in it too much to figure it out completely.
Hmm.
I think modern mobx is something like mobx Lite or
Oh,
mobx 3 something, state 3. Um, it's either like forks of it or something. I don't
mm.
really know.
Okay. So that's just sort of like a corner of React that is still kind of happening, but it's not talked about a lot.
Mobix was really big at the time.
Yeah, I remember it being big enough that I started reading the documentation, even though I didn't do Redux or
Right.
React, because I was curious, like, what is observable? Maybe was that around 2017 that mobx was the biggest? Because I because I remember looking into it because they had the term observable, and I was starting to learn about
Uh-huh.
arcs.js, and then I saw that, oh, it only does synchronous reactivity, and I was like, okay, meh, it's fine, I guess.
Yeah, it's fine for React.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have some forks. I don't kind of like remember which one is the most used one.
Okay.
It was kind of like a second solution, kind of like it's like, yeah, I don't like Redux, I like Mobix the same way as like I don't like Coke, I like Pepsi. So it's
Right.
just some people just liked it more, and I think this one is like the modern one. Doesn't use like observables, but the other one does. Not the observables, the decorators. I'm sorry,
Oh, okay.
or maybe it doesn't. I don't remember. Okay,
All
so
right. Oh,
this one is archived. JSON-mobx. Okay, so this one is using classes. I don't see decorators yet, but
make observable. Maybe they changed it to make observable.
yeah, but they're pretty. They should be close. Yeah. I think most people who use mobx use it with decorators. I don't think it's I don't see it in docs anymore. But
Hmm.
yeah, the like the appeal of it was that you can just like,
Mutate it.
yeah, mutate it. And
Yeah.
again, for smaller applications, that actually kind of like works. That's actually fine, and you're not going to die if you're using it,
Maybe.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how much did we get through this? So
Half.
that was kind of like height of Redux, kind of like mind share, and
Oh,
um, a feature that Redux relied on was React context, and
okay.
it was kind of like undocumented feature, and React documented it in 2018. So it was in production for like 3 4 years, right?
Okay. I remember learning a little bit about it at this time because I was getting Redux and using it in AngularJS.
Hmm.
And I was looking at how they integrate it in React so I could figure out how to integrate it in AngularJS.
Uh-huh.
And I don't remember much from that time, but um, yeah.
Right. This this was kind of like the height. You could try your own React context, but I think at the time no one kind of like wanted to. You could use it for like toggle team or something like that. It wasn't like for no one was building like uh, real applications around it
Hmm.
until hooks happened, and hooks was like a real kind of like React 2.0, right? Kind of like moment, and uh, you can see Redux there in because there was a use reducer hook that
Oh
was
yeah.
clearly kind of like, hey, you can
Yeah.
do Redux kind of stuff in hooks, and people
Yeah.
kind of like took it too close to the heart.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a bad idea from what I know, because it's tied to the component, right?
I'm,
You can cut and paste it because it's the same syntax as Redux. So if you can start in the component and go later, but share it between components later. But yeah, so in that sense, it's not a bad idea. But at the same time, it's like, I think for most people, it's too complex for simple component state,
mhm.
but it's not powerful enough for above that. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
I just don't
remember.
see it used very much.
Right. So, user reducer is kind of like interesting concept, and I think kind of like why it's there is that because like use state is internally like realized as you implemented as like user reducer. So
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
so it's like it made
Why
sense
not?
for them like technically to do it, and it kind of like wouldn't make sense to like not expose it as a, like as a separate a separate hook. But this idea that you can just like drop your Redux and just use reducers everywhere, it didn't pay out. And the
Yeah.
funny story from that time is that Redux had, I think, I don't remember like exact version numbers, but something like here it was Redux version 4, but then they did Redux version 5, and like in a year or less they did Redux version 6, something like that. And the change was that they said, hey, this use context thing is so cool, everyone should use it, Redux itself should use it as well. And they had such a huge like drop in performance that they dropped everything and like returned to kind of like to older ways of how they doing everything, kind of like outside
Yeah.
of React.
Hook into, yeah, use selector, right?
Something
Just
like
hook
that.
into a component.
I don't remember, but um, what took them maybe like a half a year took the community much longer.
Oh.
We ourselves like have a project that is kind of like based on like just using use context, just using like regular, and it's not the most performance, it's not the most like easy to use and all that stuff. It's not. It's the more that I kind of like look at how it used, the more I see that like how you can't just use it the way that you want to use it. You need to do much
Okay.
more complicated
Management.
things.
So if I found a React website and the
Uh-huh.
performance was awful, even though it was simple UI, it was probably during this time, maybe.
It could be.
Okay.
I think like bad performance is unfortunately like no matter the framework is complicated, and it's like it's many
Can
different
always creep up.
things, and that's why it's like hard to fix it.
Okay.
But I don't know. It's hard for me to generalize it like that. But I just wanted to note this idea of that like this was like a Hook's honeymoon where everyone was sure that you can just write
Do
your
everything.
own simple hook. You don't need any library, and it will work fine. And it didn't.
Okay. So
And
yeah, hooks, when the hooks presentation happened, I started paying more attention to React
mhm.
because it looked so good to me.
And this
And
is
yeah.
where this like idea of like higher order components and stuff, this is where it died. It's like, yeah, you don't need to have a separate component to handle your logic. Just create a hook that handles your logic. And
Okay.
this is how I kind of like wanted to um, this is how I wanted to say that like 2000 20, kinda more or less, is where we got to kind of like where we are right now. So people said, "Hey, trying to write my own hooks to do everything, trying to write my own use fetch," and like everyone ran and tried to write use fetch hook for their own project. I think
Hmm.
in our project it's called use server API or something like that. So it's like everyone tried to do that,
Yeah.
and it ended up that Tanner Lindsley was the best at it. Everyone
So he
tried, but
won.
not everyone succeeded. So this is where we're like, oh, this custom hook thing. If I have like a library that does custom hooks, that's where it really shines. If I try to write my own Redux using my hooks, my custom hooks, it goes poorly, and so on. So, and this is where kind of like Redux rebranded as Redux Toolkit, which is pretty cool software. Where's our like graph?
Yeah, I'm currently using it right
Yeah,
now.
so it's like Redux is still growing. uh,
Yeah, I just rewrote a project from Redux Toolkit to StateAdapt, and it was Redux Toolkit, so it's like less code than regular Redux,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it's
and
still
it's more
decreased by.
TypeScript oriented. I think that's also like what kind of like happened at this time. So this is
Yeah.
where all the like valtio, zustand, jotai, kind of like just reimagining.
Okay, so
Uh-huh.
there are a bunch of hooks, and then everyone's like having a hard time creating the perfect hook,
Yeah, yeah,
and then a bunch of libraries came out that use nice hooks,
yeah, yeah,
and people really like them. Okay,
yeah. And
so that's basically 2020.
I think that's how I would kind of like sell Jotai to someone is like, yeah. So imagine how in 2000, like remember how in 2019 you thought that you can write like a perfect context provider, perfect like reducer and all that stuff. That's what Jotai does. They have just one provider and one kind of like selector or like a thing that can connect to that provider, and
Okay.
it works exactly on the same kind of like plane, but it's the most performant kind of like way of implementing that. If you would try to do that, like, hey, I want to have a provider for my theme, I want to have a provider for my like username, I want to have provider for like, and you have 100 providers, and like imagine you wanted to simplify that. That's how you get Jotai. It's a
Okay.
provider context management kind of like system.
So I have a thought to share,
Sure.
and you may not like it, um, because it's somewhat like annoyed at React because because I I feel like this whole entire evolution of state management in React has been centered on React itself. It's been constrained by React. Like it's all about React. Every time React changes, they add hooks, then everything changes. And to me, that is what makes a framework a framework. Is it affects everything on top of it. So when I think of like state management and what problems we're solving, I I don't think of, or at least in the Angular side, I never thought of like, okay, how do we deal with change detection in Angular? I never thought about that. I didn't think that was a state management concern. I was concerned with um how do I organize my files? How do I make the boilerplate less? How do I make it more RxJS? Like, and how do I make RxJS nicer to use? And and other people were like, how do I use less RxJS and less Redux? And because that's NGRX and Angular. So it's kind of I yeah, I so I think I underestimated how much it was really like React was the center of attention for all of this. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of like the presentation that I'm giving. Probably like other
Okay.
people see it differently, but
Okay.
this is how I kind of like felt through that all of those changes. Like this is how this is how I make sense of it. I just
Okay.
wanted to quickly kind of like say that there were other kind of like ways of managing state, and that idea of like you see that everything is like is inside of React. It's like, yeah, but Redux is like outside of React. Like you can
Hmm.
use it outside, and like zustand and some other stuff they can live outside of React, but they are still affected. Like if React is now written with hooks, they have to have like hooks API for their libraries. So
Yeah.
I can kind of like see both sides. So quickly, for kind of like completeness,
Hmm.
React router is also like a state management library.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because you put some stuff in URL, you put some stuff in parameters or like state, or there's like a history state in browser's API. So uh, if
Yeah.
you watch for Ken Sidot's talks or something like that at that time, he would be saying, "Hey, try to separate your like this state from that state and that state, and it's like put as much as possible in the router."
Okay.
Uh, there were a lot of kind of like I think it's called like Relay and Apollo and all that stuff. Is like, hey, just all your stuff that you have on the server, we will turn
GraphQL.
it into some kind of like state that you can work with. So you have, if you need like a username, yeah, just request a username from GraphQL, and you uh, and you will get it, and you will have a way to like update it and stuff, right? So if you're like doing some mutation, you have a way to mutate it and get like that it's pending, and then that you got like a new cache, a new version from the server and stuff. So I
So,
mhm.
yeah, my impression of that side of React is that it's almost like PhD level React. It's like almost nobody uses it, but some people like live in it and it's like all they do. So I don't know.
I just got
That's
notification that Daniel followed me on Twitch. He's a guy who's writing Next.
oh cool.
Yeah. Thanks. We also got a question about like why would you use StateAdapt instead of solid signals, and that's interesting like direction, and we haven't got there yet, but that I think we are
Yeah.
going to discuss it a lot. So
Yeah.
so I just
Maybe.
wanted to quickly mention that for Redux is like when we talked about like those higher order components, where like, hey, I want my like WebSocket subscription to be like a thing, right? I want to um, either abstract it, or like, yeah, probably like abstract it or reuse it. This is where I create higher order components. But the other way of looking at it was, hey, I can use Redux middleware to handle all that. This is where all the redux-thunks, sagas, and observables. This is how I got into redux-js, because when I looked into all of those options, rewriting all of this like from Flux, I was like, okay, so how do we do it in Redux? And it's like you use middleware, but it's like, why
Mhm.
is it so bad? And the only middleware that kind of like made sense and worked with TypeScript was redux-ovservable. So I had
Interesting.
to inflict a React.js on my whole team.
How did that end?
uh, Fine. In the end, it's kind of like, yeah, React.js was kind of like too magical, and like I was the one who like would have to like do it, right?
Okay. Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Right.
Yeah,
And
and you know what? My opinion now is after thinking, I'm writing an article about unidirectional stuff and how I think I'm calling it Redux is not unidirectional.
Uh-huh.
And I realized while I was thinking about it that actually redux-ovservable is probably the worst exposure somebody could have to RxJS, because you get minor syntactic benefits, but you don't get reactive benefits, because in the end you're outputting an action which is performing, it's I don't know, it's complicated and I
Yeah,
haven't thought all the way
you
through
are
it. So
not connecting your XJS to your like button, right? The button needs to
right.
talk to Redux.
It's like a
Redux
separate thing.
talks to yeah.
Yeah.
But it's in the same vein of like higher order components being a separate thing, right? So you want it to be separate. You want to have like a I forgot how it like in the Redux saga that would be like sagas. So like I have a saga that can fetch a user information. I can have a saga that is like sending a message. So you're
Hmm.
like you can try to reuse it. You can kind of like abstract it of like you introduce some kind of like API. This is the action that it gets. This is the action that it produces. What it does kind of like inside, that's its own problem. If it needs to retry it, it could like retry it by itself. You're kind of like abstracting that part. In
Yeah.
theory, maybe that meant that you could like share sagas as like a npm packages or something, but I don't think that ever happened. Yeah, and just for completeness, XState exists. I kind of like didn't touch it too much, and like immer and
Yeah.
immutable, they still exist, and they used to be like a bigger part of this whole discussion. But so zustand is just modern Redux. Valtio is just modern mobx. React query and similar solutions, as well as like routers, are probably, or like loaders. So like a lot of modern frameworks, they have some kind of like get server side props or some other ways. It's like, hey, use those things as much as possible, because that's how you kind of like get outside of React state management.
Hmm.
Like the more stuff that you have kind of like there, the easier your life is. And I think that's kind of like where it is right now. Is like, yeah, just try to do all of your like data loading, especially, and like error handling, all of that for this kind of stuff. Yeah, just try to put it as far from React as possible. Going back to that idea of like we're rendering a button with new props. If your
Yeah.
get server side props or like a remix loader and stuff like that, if they're like live outside of React, React becomes more like a view library where it kind of like shines.
Hmm. Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense, but it
Yeah.
makes
No, that
kind of
makes
like perfect
sense.
sense for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And it all sound, yeah, what you presented, it sounds pretty familiar with what, like it makes sense now that I hear it. But I wasn't paying attention very closely throughout the years. And so, it sounds right what you're saying, but I'm
Yeah, and
taking your word
again,
for it.
that's
And
that's kind of like my opinion, and some people probably like see it differently.
yeah, I'm
Uh,
sure.
yeah. So, and in the end, Jotai is for me, it's it's kind of like two things. Going back to that question about like signals and stuff, it is a lot more, a lot. How do I say it? Half of Jotai for me is just that thing of how would you use React by itself with like use a reducer and use context. Okay, I have a dark theme state, and the states
Yeah.
needs to be shared between like multiple components. I can create Jotai atom that is named like dark theme or something like that, and
Hmm.
I can, whenever I instead of like use state, I use like use atom, and I just specify, hey, this is the thing that I want to use. And if I have two components that use the same atom, they're going to talk about the same state. it's the same thing as if I did a context provider and I like prop drilled all the way to the customer, and I can use reducer style, I can use state style. So it's like it's really, API is really designed to be like as close to React as possible on the
Okay.
on the surface level. There are like more complicated things about like creating like a uh, and that's I guess like where we go to like signals idea is like, what's the point of signals is that if you have a signal and it changes, you already know what needs to react to that
Mm-hmm.
change.
Yeah.
And in case of React, that's like the smallest possible unit to of change in React is React components. You
Mm-hmm.
can write your own kind of like if you have a ref to the DOM, and if you subscribe to changes in Jotai atoms, you can like change your DOM outside of React rendering,
Yeah.
but no one is going to do that. And Jotai actually provided like experimental build where it basically it implements similar to like Preact signals, where if you use signal in like in DOM nodes, it will only update that DOM node instead of like
Mm-hmm.
re-rendering the whole component. But that's more experimental stuff. That's like in real React, the minimal unit of change is a component. So if you have like a username, just create a component that's called username and subscribe to Atom there, and you will get the same kind of like pinpoint updates. But which again, with virtual DOM, that's the whole idea, is that there is not that much difference between like pinpoint updates and like rendering the whole component.
Yeah.
It is a difference. It is like a thing, but conceptually you don't have to think about it until you have to think about it. That's kind of like the whole selling point. And this is where the comparison with signals comes in, and this is what I like usually would say is like, yeah, React has signals. They're just called atoms, and they work the same way of like, if two components have the same signal, they're going to have the same state. If you have two components, like one is updating the state, the other is like reading the state, only the component that is reading the state is going to be updated. From the whole React tree, it's not like everything is marked as dirty and you need to like re-render the whole React. No. It's actually like pretty pinpoint. It's like the change will be kind of like direct, fine grained, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
the term. Okay, I think that's the end of my presentation.
Okay. Wow, that was great. Thank you. Thank you for that
Sure.
insider
I'm not
story
an
from.
insider. I'm
I've definitely been an outsider with React though. Like I tried after I saw hooks, I was like, hey, I think it might be time to learn React, and then I was like, hey, I'm gonna wait a bit because I don't want to touch class components. So after a year, I applied for a job and I interviewed with the CTO for a company in San Francisco, and I was gonna move to California, and that was March 2020.
uh-huh.
And then that hiring freeze happened, and
Yeah.
that just got canceled. So I stayed in Angular and didn't move to California. And um, at that same time, I started to put more effort into StateAdapt. Uh, like I think a lot of these projects happened because of the pandemic. I think because a lot of people were at home and thinking about what to do. But
Right.
anyway, that's just a theory I have. But
Yeah, it's in terms of the dates, those dates are really kind of like just to order things. It's not like the exact
mhm.
dates, but
Okay.
uh, most of them are pretty close. So I think those tools did start in 2020, and
So
it doesn't mean that they. Um, it doesn't mean that thing that happened is that they were written at that time. Maybe just like more people were interested in newer things. I don't know.
What in the case with me, I started StateAdapt in 2019 in the middle of the summer and just didn't put serious effort into it. Or maybe it was 2020. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. Um, yeah, that was a time I put a lot more effort into it than any time before. But I did the same thing in 2021, and then for 6 months now I've been doing it, 2022 to now. But so one question I have about Jotai and why you like it. What was the first thing you saw about it where you were like, okay, I really like that?
I think that's as simple as so I don't remember exactly the story because I kind of like it wasn't that big of a deal. But
Okay.
when recoil presentation happened, and I think it was like one of the React Conf videos, and it was like, yeah, that all of this makes sense. This is exactly if we had those kind of like pinpoint providers, pinpoint context consumers, that's how we would have like used it. So it made sense is because like hooks were really popular. Everyone was like sure that this is the way. It was just it was like clunky to use, and it was how do I say it? People pretty quickly realize that the performance is not there. It's like if you read just right after the hooks were released, it's like, yeah, use context for everything. It's going to be great. And it's like right away after that, it was like, no, you can't you can't do that. It's like
Yeah.
just use it for simple stuff like your theme that is like not changing often. But like, okay, well, what do I use if it changes often? And it's like recoil makes their video.
Okay.
Yeah, and Jotai is basically like just a smaller kind of like API surface of recoil. I'm surprised that recoil stayed like 2x Jotai downloads. I was sure that people will like realize, yeah, why would I use recoil if there is Jotai? Yeah, but for some reason, it's still really popular package, and a lot of people seem to use it. I I think it's even though like recoil is like done by Facebook and stuff, I don't think it's like supported that well.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
I had some like production, not production, but what's the best way to say it? So yeah, just some bugs with it. I was like, yeah, it doesn't seem like too kind of like production ready, but
Yeah,
yeah,
too refined. Yeah.
they're not that different between each other, and uh, that's mostly like a flavor question. Like, do you want to use Redux or zustand? It's just yeah, whatever you like more.
Okay. So for the next 5 minutes, do you want to show me specific like Jotai syntax? I don't know. Do you want I
We can go straight to StateAdapt because we spend some time on like technical difficulties, and it's getting pretty late. So we can. I mean, yeah, I can show it like for a few seconds.
okay.
And
And
actually, like speaking of Jotai too, so what is happening right now with Jotai is that they're trying to be less dependent on the React, and
more
uh,
independent. Are they going to try to be used in like Svelte or Solid.js or something?
I think it's going this way because like zustand
Oh,
and valtio you can use it outside of React, and Jotai was like I think it was the only one from this Daishi Daishi set of libraries that was it was basically like it was storing everything in React state. So there was like no way to if you wanted to have like a external servers talk to Jotai, you need to have a React component and or like a like a global variable, right? That can talk with outside. So
Okay.
I think they're probably just like Solid and Svelte and stuff. They're just like making them making them
Yeah.
to be more agnostic. And
Interesting.
yeah, so I think this is literally like the selling point.
And Atom, what is that?
Right. S- In a sense,
Oh,
you
I
should.
see. Stable atom equals atom 0. So
Yeah,
you
yeah,
just create an atom like that, and then you can use it inside a component like that.
yeah. So the idea is that like Atom is kind of like a name. It's like a thing, like a
Oh,
theme, or like a user, or I don't know, like screen size, right? So it's just a thing
it's like
that you.
a tiny container of state, right?
Yeah. So because like if you use React and you have like three use states, the name of your thing is like the name of the component and like first one, second one, third one, right? So it's just like how they are numbered inside of the component. But
Hmm.
here you're naming the thing. And in
Okay.
recoil, huh? And in recoil, you actually give atoms like a string key. So it's like the idea of like the name is like really important.
Hmm. Yeah.
What Jotai does, uh, they just simplify kind of like nomenclature of like, yeah, like why do I need a key? What's like I don't need keys for my React state. It's like why do I need
Yeah.
this? It's
It's a
just
variable name
yeah, yeah.
that
And
works
they also
instead.
have like selectors, which are kind of like computed values.
Oh,
So you're not imagine you have some calculation that you don't want to be like a uh, like extra state inside of React. So you have like a count and you have a double. You can write this as like count equals like use atom, and double equals like two times the count, right? So, but
hmm.
that's you need like kind of like a component for that. If you wanna have it abstracted in some way, you can create just like this computed atom, and then if you like never subscribe to that atom, it's not even going to be calculated. So it works a lot like signals.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the topic I'm thinking about in my API for StateAdapt in React.
Yeah. So this is like the this is the simple way how you like, hey, I have an atom, it has a value. Here I have an atom that has a value and a name.
Yeah.
And this is a kind of like a global name, so it's like similar to how React query
Redux.
works, where if you have like two queries that have the same name, they're going to have the same value.
Okay. It's
So
because they're all under the same context.
right. Yeah. And Jotai actually has like this concept of like scope. So their naming is like scoped plus key, if that makes sense. No, we
I
should
don't know
not
how it
go there.
works.
It's just like more
I don't know how it
complicated.
works, but I'm sure it's really cool.
Yeah. And there is actually like a trick and with use memo. Basically, the atoms in yeah, this will cause an infinite loop. Like atoms in Jotai, they rely on reference equality. So if you call a function atom zero two times, it will return two like different atoms. Imagine that it returns like ID and it's like it increments it on every time you call it. So it's like
Yeah.
if you call atom zero and like on the next line you call, oops. Okay, be right back.
Yeah. Yep. I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back. Yeah, so I think I used to have like God sandboxes. I don't know if they still have it. Oops, what's happening? Okay. Okay, dark mode. Adam. Okay, this is a bit more complicated than we need. Uh, okay. How do I get to a sandbox, but it's actually not complicated? I think it makes sense that they have like a async. Yeah. Okay. Oh no. I need to go to different user. Okay. So do you have the atoms here, or are the atoms? Atom is observable. Okay, I'm going to ignore that part. But if you have just like atom 0 and atom 0, it's like clearly those are like different atoms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that it happens is like every time you call this function, it just returns some kind of like ID. So
Oh,
that's why if you try to create
use
atom
memo.
atom inside of component, it's going to return new atom every time. So if
Yeah.
you do ref or memo or state, you can like make sure that it's the same atom. And it's actually like a pretty fine pattern of just like, hey, I have an atom that is like, um, what is okay? Let's decide on use memo. So I have this atom, and I can now pass it to my children. So I can say, hey, this is the thing, and if you wanna read this atom, go ahead and do this. And the thing is that like this atom is not going to change, so you don't have like this is because the atom is not a value; it's a name. But if you have two atoms and like depending on something you use like one or the other, right?
Yeah.
That sort of stuff is going to work seamlessly.
Okay.
So I sent you the first thing, now I'm sending you the second thing, and then the first thing and the second thing, they will have like separate values. And if you have like 10 things that are using it, it's all going to work. And this approach of just having like a global value that is living outside is what we usually do. In a sense, this is really close to redux store. It's like, here is where I store my user. So this is my user, and it has like a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just export this. Uh, I just export this user, and whatever the thing that is using the user is going to refer to the same user. That's it. That's kind of like how signals work. That's how that's how names work. So
Yeah.
I think that's most of the kind of like Jotai that you need is that it works like it works like state. You just have uh, like provider somewhere. And new versions of Jotai don't even require provider, so it just knows that there's like a global kind of like a store for all of this stuff. And yeah, just refer to the same thing, you will get the same value.
So I'm just like looking at the shiny RxJS right there. That is so it that's cool that they let
Sure.
you use it with RxJS.
Yeah,
I like that.
Jotai has a lot of integrations, so
Okay.
uh, you can use I don't know, like XState,
Mm.
React query, all that stuff. And so they're like, hey, this atom needs to have a value that is like returns what the server returned. Yeah, sure. Let's just do that.
Okay. Is there, I'm guessing the answer is no, because this is kind of it's not commonly asked for. But is there a way to um, hmm, no, there. How do you update state in an atom?
There are multiple ways, but in the simplest way, you get a counter and you get a set counter.
Oh, okay. Um, is there a way to define the update logic with the atom itself?
Sure. So that's a bit like a tricky part of it, and let's go back to docs. Uh, so yeah, so those are like all the different integrations that they have. I use immer for just like this style of like, hey, I just want to mutate stuff. I don't use it in like in our current project too much, but what you're asking is utilities.
Family?
Yeah, family is an interesting one. It's more about like how do you get the name for the atom,
Oh,
because you can have like atoms of families. Oh, sorry, family of atoms, and that's basically almost like a scope. So it's like, hey, I have, I don't have like a user, I have like a first user. So it's like, and if I want to go to second one, I want to have like a second one. So family has its own kind of like param. So that's going to be like a user ID,
oh,
but
okay.
you have like a user's family. So that basically means where you're getting, um, uh, where is it? So it's family. Uh, yeah, I didn't see where it's like red then later. Uh, yeah, so you're like you're using Atom, and instead of like having that use memo that you do yourself, this function for the given input will return the same atom all the time.
Okay.
So if this is atom, if this is family of like users, for the atom for the first user is going to be the same. So if you have two components that are calling the same family and are talking about the same user, they're going to get the same atom. It's a kind of like a layer of caching, and
Mhm.
you can like implement it yourself. But this is just a terminology that comes uh, from Recoil.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, so I was looking for basically,
Centralized state changes.
right. I just don't know how they.
I
Those dogs
looked
like changed so much, so many
I
times.
looked at zustand a little bit and I
Hmm.
saw it in zustand kinda. Um, but when I looked a little bit at Jotai, I didn't see it in Jotai, so I assumed it didn't have it, but maybe it does.
Okay, okay. I'm just trying to remember how documentation is structured, and it's probably concepts. Uh, so so we have an atom,
Mhm.
and this atom has some kind of like value stored in it, and in this case, it's like an array. But then
Okay.
we can have selectors in recoil or like computed
Yeah.
like in all the like signal libraries, or like dependent atoms, I think they call it, in Jotai. And it basically, so get will allow you to read any atom, and there is also like set and all that stuff. So this atom is defined as kind of like a selector, right? So it will
Hmm.
get this value, and it will return some new value.
Yeah.
And that means if you like subscribe to this atom, this function will run. If you subscribe to this atom, this function will run. If
Okay.
it actually works a lot of kind of like how solid dependency detection works. If you have like this get call here, it will subscribe to that atom. And if you have like two atoms that you want to subscribe, as long as you like call both of them, you will be subscribed to both of them. And that
I like
means
that
that,
syntax. Yeah, that's cool syntax.
yeah. And remember how we played with like quick, and you had like a first signal and second signal. If the first signal is false, you don't subscribe to the second one. So it
Yeah.
will work the same way. So
Cool.
if you read this atom, but like for filtering you need to access like the second one, if this atom is like empty and the filter function wasn't called, you will not be subscribed to the second part. So it's okay. So now we need to find like writable, writable, resettable.
I saw resettable.
Right. So the resettable
Yeah.
is a bit
Oh, that was one of the results.
yeah, it's a bit steelier. But so this thing is kind of like how atoms work. This is like full Super Saiyan or whatever the kids say nowadays.
The what?
Never mind.
Okay.
So basically, this is a selector. This is like how do I turn this text atom into some new value, right? So
Mhm.
like I turn it into like uppercase. So this atom will always have like uppercase. And again, you can do all of this side stuff inside of the React component, but you can do like uppercase in when you render. But this way, it will all of those selectors will run in Jotai context, not in like React rendering context. So if you have a way to kind of like to opt out of the change or something like that, it will happen sooner. You will not like trigger React's re-rendering logic.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Say this value is like if length is less than 7, then like return empty string. But if it's like more than 7, then uppercase. Until
Hmm.
you type first 7 letters, it will kind of like it will calculate the first time that it's empty, and it will not trigger any React updates after that.
Okay. Cool.
So this is kind of like but then this is the second part of the atom is like writable part. What is going to happen if you like how I showed like counter and set counter? What if this atom? What if someone tries to write to this atom? They're going to write it by like providing some arguments. So like setting a new value, for example.
Yeah.
And this is where you can do like reducer style. So this could be like an action. So this could be like reset action, for example, uh, or just like a new value. And if you see this, if you try to write into this atom with this new value, it will do some logic. So like in this case, it will just like write to this atom, and because it wrote a new value, it will like recalculate the new value of dependent atom. So this is how all of those integrations are built. If I go to like our production thing, I can find local storage something. Local. No. Where do we have it? We have it somewhere. Persistent. This is so hard to do. Oh yeah. So yeah, atom without local storage. So I define an atom. Yeah, this one is like real-time local storage. So if you update the value in like one tab, the other one get the
Cool.
notification, which is like a pretty cool feature.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So here's the like derived atom. So this is where it reads the value, and this is where we get. This is where we do updates. So
Yeah,
update could be kind of like in React set state. So it could be like a function that gets the previous value, or it could be just like a new value. So in React, when you do set state, you can call like x.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay.
X plus 1, or you can just like 7, right? So that's kind of like the point. So if it's a function, we will call this function with old value. Otherwise, we will just get the new value, and we set this to our base atom. So here, base atom is like just for kind of like change detection to work, but like this is kind of like the side effect of setting new value. So we set this new value and we stored it to local storage, and when we first read the value in this base atom, we read it from local storage. So for me, if I have like existing code with an atom, I can just like add this. Instead of calling like atom 0, I call atom with local storage 0, and I now get this like encapsulated logic. And this is the same way as like atom with like React query, right? So it's like, hey, I get this like encapsulated logic. Instead of just like giving like a string or like number, now I give a URL. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let me just quickly show the integrations. I don't use a lot of integrations, but this is the idea. Is like, hey, this is the atom that can do React query, and I give it the fetching function, and I give it the key and some options probably. And here it doesn't matter if this atom is like just a string atom, right? Or if it's like a side effecty async and so on and so on. Async is actually like interesting question in Jotai, because you can turn it into like a suspense event. Basically, if your async item is like not resolved, it can throw a promise. So you can make it so that if you have a router and like depending on URL, you need to fetch a resource, you can make that resource fetching atom like atom that will throw and like you will trigger the suspense boundaries and all that kind of like stuff. I don't use that myself, so I don't want to I don't want to kind of like go too deep into that. But where is it? Right. So you use like loadable loadable helper that will like turn your so this one is like unwrapping a sync atom so that it doesn't throw. Like it will make sure that it doesn't trigger suspense boundary. Instead, you will get kind of like a resource in solid where it will have just some value of like, hey, I'm loading.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay. I see.
Anyway, I think we went through a lot of it, and we should try playing with StateAdapt now.
Okay.
And I can maybe like for some particular feature, I can bring up Jotai
Yeah,
again if
I was going
that's
to ask
going to be
you to do
relevant.
that. Yeah, so there are two things I'd like. One is that I want you to bring up how Jotai would do it, and
Hmm.
then the other one is um with somebody with a lot more React experience than I have, how does this fit in React? Like, does it seem natural in React? So, do you want?
Do they work, the other implementations?
Yeah, but it's you have to paste in your own little utility to like bridge. So I haven't published a package for it yet, but
Uh,
the thing that I will publish is the snippet that you could just paste in yourself. It's probably.
okay.
So how should we do this? Should I
So you
walk
sent
through the
me
homepage and explain it, or
uh, you sent me like a
yeah,
this demo.
stack blitz? Yeah, I'm not sure this would be the exact best way to sort of get an overview of the syntax. I think it would be. I kind of wanted to rewrite this in Jotai, but there isn't time for that probably.
Uh,
Um, could I just could I like share my screen and
sure.
walk through the example I have on my homepage,
Hmm.
and I'll ask you as I go.
If that makes sense.
Yes, if it seems like a good API for React,
Sure.
because yeah, I haven't. I asked feedback. Oh, you need to enable me to share screen.
Oh no.
I asked for feedback like a year or two ago, and from React developers, and they didn't quite get like deep enough into it to really understand what was going on, I think.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it was okay, but I realized after learning more React that it could be better. So if you have any feedback that's like critical at all, please share it, because it's easy for me to change right now. Very easy, because this is like the last thing I want to do before I publish 1.0, because I've used it on like 30 Angular projects. I've used it on just a couple React projects, and I have a library for React. So when I release 1.0, I want to make sure that that library is good.
Hmm.
And in the future, I'll just add these later that first felt in solid. But and maybe at the very end, I can answer that person's question about why you would use StateAdapt instead of just signals. But anyway, so the idea is you can just start with simple state. So it's like use state, sort of like Jotai is talking about,
Uh-huh.
but you do pass a string as the first argument, and that's like the namespace
Uh-huh.
that actually shows up in Redux DevTools. So, uh, yeah, so you can see it. Well, it changes from Bob to Bilbo
Yeah,
when
pretty
you
similar
set.
so far.
Yeah, so that's the initial state name store, and you call namestore.set
Hmm.
to do that. So, yeah, so the idea is Redux DevTools for local state, because I realize that the global store is a big place. Like it's if you just pass a string in here, the chance of collision is extremely low with something else, because I mean, this is just a simple demo, so you could have something somewhere else that's called name, because that's really basic. But in a real project, you're gonna like scope these, and there's like extremely low chance. Like, what are the chances in a Redux project you name the same reducer? You know, you have the same name for the same reducer, right?
So what's going to happen if you name it the same?
It'll give you an error.
Okay.
Like you load the page, it'll throw an error. It's yeah. So it collides, because this is actually managing state in a global store,
Hmm.
and this is the key in it. And you can
I think
namespace it.
that's a bit in React query. If you name two things with the same key, it will
It
just like,
uses the same state.
sure, yeah, let's just reuse the state, so you will not get an error if you like were
Yeah.
not expecting that.
With this, you don't reuse the same key, you reuse the same store. So
Hmm.
you pass the store around, not the key. And so when I was using React Query, we would create hooks for each key. So we'd say instead of use query user, we'd say export const use user equals use query. That's how we did it. I'm not sure how other people do it, but anyway, so this is just the basic example. And then so the syntax changes to this, and this allows you to define selectors. And so this is like what you're saying, this is not bound to the component. So that's why you would define this. And yeah, so this turns into an array. Same thing though, initial state path in the global store.
Okay, can you scroll a bit up? So here you're doing name.state and okay, so using name.state here as well. Okay.
And then here the selector becomes available on here. So what this is actually the weird part that I just implemented. This is a proxy object. And so when you access this, first of all, when you call this, it's subscribing to an observable of the state in the global store. And it's calling set state whenever that observable emits. So whenever this changes, the component will re-render. And proxy, what it's doing is it's getting that state that was set, and it's passing it to a selector. So you have the store state, that's the main state, and then the default selector, it's called state. And then you have this new selector called yield name, and both of these will get passed into the selector, or they will call, they will get called and pass this state into them. So yeah, yesterday I was
so far. How do you make sure that it works TypeScript wise?
TypeScript wise? Oh, that's the fun part. That's the majority of the work. Yeah, all of this is type safe. This is this is string because you passed in a string, and this is a string because you returned a string here.
Right, but how does it know that the name is also a string?
This, because you passed in a string here.
Right, so selector is like a record of some key and a function that takes the state.
Yeah, record. Yeah, it's a record. Yep, and it just so heavy TypeScript inference, because I hate extra syntax. I want inference as much as possible. Sometimes you can't rely on inference because the compiler can get slow on a complex project, but until you get to that point, I feel like it's great to rely on it. And it's easy to fix once you get there, because all you have to do is explicitly define a type for some, any explicit type makes the compiler do less work. So anyway, so that's selectors. And I think,
so I have a silly question.
Yeah.
So why do you need name and name store to be separate? What if name just had like the same way that it has kind of like global state value that you can read? What if it had name.set, right?
Well, there are two reasons for that. And the first reason is because the state, this is using a hook. So use state underneath. And so this has to be in a component, but name store is an object that can be anywhere. And so that's one reason, is name store is the same thing you would return outside of a component. So I have a different function called just adapt, and it returns a store. And so, but inside a component, if you wanted to use the store, you'd call use store.
Right.
And you would just get this.
So if you have adapt and use store, that's basically like Atom and use Atom.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is kind of like a shorthand syntax for that.
Yeah. So here's an example. 8, shared state. My last example that only exists for React, because shared state is a topic in React. Uh, um, yeah. So up here you return a store, and then down here you use the store. So yeah, same thing. This is the proxy with the selectors on it. But yeah, so StateAdapt just combines these two.
Okay,
Does
so
that
let's
is
kind of
that
like
weird?
slow down for a second. So,
Okay.
um,
Well, I was gonna the demo on the homepage incrementally gets to here.
okay,
So
let's go
we can it's
through the
actually
whole
the
thing.
exact same demo.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, okay. So the third thing is this is something that's really important to me. And this is something that I learned from the Flux presentation.
Uh-huh.
Because the idea behind unidirectionality for me, Ryan Carniato, he kind of interprets it as like this read and write segregation. And that was the second reason I separated these. Because this is read and this is write. It can be read too,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. That's
with
usually how it
observables.
goes, yeah.
But what was I saying? Oh yeah, yeah. But with the Flux presentation, the idea was that instead of a piece of state giving control of itself out to any event handler or callback function, where you get control logic that's scattered and out of context, you have it centralized, so co-located, and like separation of concerns, the same exact idea as hooks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to have a way to define state and have ways it could change defined with it. So,
Which is the pretty common like pattern, right? So even like reducer and like stores in
mhm,
Redux is like,
reduce, yeah.
here's my state, here are my actions on those on that state, and I think, how do I know? Okay, I see now. So if it's selector, that's like computed values, and if it's like top level, that's kind of like actions.
Mhm, yep,
Okay.
yeah.
And
And the
again,
reason I picked
TypeScript kind of
this,
like aware. How do
yes,
you
it is.
pass arguments?
Arguments. Oh, a second parameter
Uh-huh.
of this function,
So what
and
Jotai
it
did in
infers
version
it.
2 is they added ability to pass like any number of parameters. So
Oh,
before
cool.
it was like one parameter, but now it's like 0 or infinity.
That's I will never be able to do that because I have third and fourth arguments already.
Okay.
But yeah, so this though, um, when you call reverse name,
Uh-huh.
this is the action type that shows up in Redux DevTools.
Yeah.
So yeah, reverse name. Um, yeah. So yeah, so that's what I was asking about with Jotai. Can you define an atom that has a state change logic as part of it, and then from the outside you just point to it and say
Right.
change
I
now?
think the difference is that Nicola just sent you a pull request with like a fixed typo. So
Really?
yeah,
Where?
you're
On
improving your
StateAdapt?
project just as we go.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you so much. Yeah,
Yeah.
so uh, in Jotai, basically, uh, you have that like writable atoms where you can pass those arguments, or like
Hmm.
0 or more arguments. So you in a sense you're limited to having like just one action, but inside of that action you can set like a object, right, that has like a more like redux style, where it's like if I want to have like a increment decrement, right, I can send just like either of strings, or
Oh, cool.
yeah, so or
Okay.
like a number, or
So like reducer, like
yeah,
you send it through and then it sees what it's being passed and
right.
then
Because when you do a writer, when you do like a write function for a writable derived atom, you can write anywhere, and it can write to like any number of stores if you have like references to them and so on. So that's probably what your like third and fourth parameters are doing.
Yeah. Well, actually, the third one is initial state,
Uh-huh.
and the fourth one is a selector's cache.
Okay.
Because I have my own way of doing selectors that's kind of unique, I think. Kind of, yeah.
I see. So
I like
if
it,
I
but it's also
wanna,
weird.
so if I have an action for name that changes some other state, how do I do that?
Okay, that's the one after the next one.
Okay.
So this one, so the reason I put all these together, the selectors and the state changes, is because this is called a state adapter, and this is in Redux and NGRX, known as entity. They have entity state
Hmm.
adapters, and they define it as a way to manipulate lists. But I thought it was a great pattern in general. And so this is like, I was working on ideas for this 2 years ago, and I realized, oh, and this is an entity adapter. This is like an adapter. So
Uh-huh.
it's syntax that I like. It's like this portable thing that you can pass anywhere. So basically, uh, you just cut this code out of the use adapt call
Uh-huh.
and put it inside create adapter. And then you can create two different stores that all have the same patterns,
Right.
but they're managing different actual state.
Right. So that's
And
probably where you in Jotai where you would use like those
yeah,
uh
I noticed,
integrations, or like families. So depending on where
yeah,
where
I
you're
noticed
going
a
with
couple
this.
places where it was really easy to compose stuff in Jotai and reuse it.
Hmm.
And so I think that's like more like fine grained functional. Whereas these are kind of, this is like a mix between object oriented and functional, because these are pure functions,
Hmm.
but it's an object.
Right.
So I think in practice, a lot of apps actually have a bunch of grouped things together. And so you can have like more syntactic convenience if you group them all together than
Uh-huh.
if they're all independent. But there are benefits to the more pure functional way too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, in Jotai you really could do like uh atom with local storage, atom with like something. It's like triply triply nested, just like function that is like atom of string. So it will add all of that functionality kind of like on top of each other. Uh,
yeah,
Similar to mixins, where we started this whole discussion.
yeah, I definitely need to learn more about Jotai. When I first saw it, I thought it was like kind of part of that ethos in React where we want to be extremely minimal and simplistic with everything.
Uh-huh.
Like our library is like 1 kilobyte because that's all you need. But there's actually a lot of interesting stuff in Jotai that I need to look at.
Yeah.
We're getting close to the next break, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay, answer the, I think I can do the next one in a minute. Um, so this is what you were asking about. If you have an action you want to change two stores.
Hmm.
So these are all observables. Like the way you change multiple stores is with observables.
Interesting.
So here I added a state reaction. It's called concat_name. So this is the payload, and you have to give it a type. And yeah, it just concats what you pass in.
Uh-huh.
And then here I have, this is basically an action. So calling dispatch, it's like name from server.next. So wherever I do that, I don't know where I do that, but
Yeah, it's just like last
oh,
green
it's a
light.
timer. It happens on its own, actually.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So this emits, and this will show up in Redux DevTools. And then the syntax for use adapt, it changes now to have the adapter be the third in this array. And then the fourth one becomes an object of sources.
Okay, so let's make a break, and
Okay.
we'll get back to it.
Okay. All right. Okay, sorry about that. Okay.
Okay, so we're almost back. I think we're back.
We're back on.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Yeah. So this is actually not very interesting. The seventh one. It's important, but not that interesting. So yeah,
So let's
this
go
is the
back
important one.
to the like trying to write to multiple stores,
Yeah, that's this one.
sources. How do you call them?
Yeah, so these are stores that react to sources. So sources are actions in Redux, basically. Actually, they're observables that emit actions. I actually call the object an action that it
Okay.
emits.
So you have stores and you have actions. And
Yeah.
okay, so so name one. That's a selector, I guess.
This thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the proxy that has selectors in it.
And now
Or
name one
state.
store is a store, and now you're adding name from server $sign as an action that this store can consume.
Yes. And when it's just by itself, it just sets the state. When it's in an object, you can specify which state change will occur.
What does that mean? Oh,
So
that's
it,
basically a store.set or store dot like action
yep.
creator. I would
Yeah.
call it.
So each store comes with set and reset automatically, and
Mm-hmm.
triggering set is when you pass in an observable here. You can also explicitly type out set. That's
Sure.
actually, I think, what I do here. Yeah, in the next one. So
That's when you need like multiple ones, right? Because
multiple
that
what?
shorthand syntax was for set, but if you need both set and
Oh, yep,
reset, that's why
yep,
we need to like expand it.
exactly. Yeah. And so the reason this is important is because it's declarative. So if you to know if something's declarative, you just ask, can I click to definition and know exactly why this is what it is at any given time? So you might be like, okay, why is yield name this value at this time? And then you'd click to definition. You see, okay, name one comes from this store, and uh, it gets set whenever this emits, and it gets reset whenever this emits. So if you notice that it reset, it's because this emitted. You don't have to find all references and find who dispatched an action or whatever. Well, eventually you do at the very top, but that, yeah, cycle.js is the only one that is 100% reactive. And it, I'm thinking about that in the future, but for now, it's just going to be a little more reactive than like a Redux type thing, because the way side effects are done in like Redux observable is it outputs an action that gets fired again. With this, you have a stream that the store directly references.
Right. So because it uses middleware in the like Redux observable, Redux is like this source of truth, and you just like try
Mm-hmm.
to talk to it, and the only way to talk to it is through actions. But here, because your stores are aware of observables, they can consume them kind of like directly. You don't have to
Yeah.
introduce that another kind of like level of indirection. So Nicolas said two things. So first is he said it's like uh, I see it's like ORM over stores, like in Symfony custom getters. I'm not entirely sure what that means. So Symfony is like PHP framework, right?
It's like I think isn't their package manager? Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, so ORM or stores. So ORM is like for databases.
Is he talking about this, like the StateAdapt stuff?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
By the way, this gets really cool. Like the stuff you can do with this. I may have gone too far, but I think it's cool.
Right. It's like a when I see this, I see Redux like there are like different ways to writing like a Redux stores. I like a way where you, and I think Redux Toolkit now does it this way, where it's kind of like you define everything in one file. So it's like,
Hmm.
here's my initial state, here are my actions, and here's
Yeah.
all of my selectors. So when I look at this, I imagine kind of like Redux Toolkit store file, but that is like at least like 5 times shorter. It's
Yeah.
good.
So yeah, I one of I think this was like my first real project that I tested this in. I converted it from Redux Toolkit to StateAdapt, and it was 42% reduction of code.
Mhm.
So yeah,
It,
I'm
it,
pretty
it's
happy because I
just
wasn't sure.
it's just like more compact because you can write two reducers in 2 lines instead of like all this ceremony that comes with Redux.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but do you think that this API fits what you've used in React? Do you think it like looks like a React type of API?
Not entirely.
Okay.
I think that's there are like two problems. So one problem is that there is no there is no like React way of doing stuff. It's just it changes over time. Like one thing is um, one thing is okay one day, but it's not okay the other. So uh,
What do you mean?
I mean, how do I say it? It just what we talked about, like higher order components or stuff. It's just like one day that was fine syntax and everyone was okay with it. The next day is like, why is it so complicated? And even like class components versus hooks, they are
Hmm.
doing the same thing. If you know kind of like the names of alternatives, you can write the same
Yeah.
code like that way or the other. And uh, how do I say it? And especially with stuff like where do you, what is the order of arguments, or what is the like the syntax for shorthands, or like those how would I call it? So when I look at this line where it's like name once, store one, and it's
Hmm.
like it's use adapt, which is hook. I'm connecting to some state.
Hmm.
There is a name of the state. Then there is a. So do you use name just for debug purposes?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think I think that's a bit like too much. Is like because in Jotai everything is also could be connected to Redux. How do I call it? Like DevTools, but
But you don't need this.
the way that you do this is you do like atom dot debug label equals something. So it's like it's more code, and like recoil doesn't need that because they already have keys. I don't remember how recoil DevTools works, but just to point out that it's like uh, the idea is that maybe you don't always use DevTools, but now you need to think about it all the time. But the only purpose of
Mm.
it is DevTools. Does that kind of like make sense? It's like
Yeah,
why am I paying this price on every on every store?
that's a good point. And yeah, so I haven't really compared against tools like Jotai yet. at that. So I'm excited to do that and see what happens. But um, compared to Redux, it's really great because
Yeah.
the string, like that's just the reducer name, and in Redux you have to have that because that's part of your reducer map or key, whatever it's called. So yeah, and actually this started as an ngxs state. Actually, that's where I created the first version of StateAdapt.
Mm-hmm.
And ngxs is from ngrx, which is from Redux. So this was a reducer originally, basically. And yeah, so it's definitely from that kind of philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
but I try to make it as minimal and feel like local state as much as possible. So yeah, I definitely have to compare more with Jotai because Jotai is like more like, it feels more relaxed, like more uh, create stuff as you need it.
Right, and
Very,
I think
yeah,
the biggest competitor in that like Redux style. I mean, yeah, the two biggest competitors are like mobx and zustand, right? So I never. I played with zustand a bit, but like I don't remember any syntax at this at the moment. But yeah, okay. So the first one is like debug key. The second is the value, and
hmm,
if you need like more complicated value, you write like value as something, right? So it's like if I have a if I have a value that stores string or a number, but the initial value is like zero, I write here is it here where I write like
yeah,
zero as number or string?
yeah. You would do that here, I think. Yeah,
Okay, so then the third parameter. Okay, third parameter is name adapter. That's another store or the same store?
that's the
That's a generic,
abstract,
yeah,
yeah,
generic
collection of functions.
mixin.
Okay.
No, it's basically a template for a store, right? So I can
Yeah.
have multiple stores with the same template.
Hmm.
If it could have been like a collection of functions, right? So if yield name is like I reuse yield name all the time, it could have been just like a function, but here
Yeah.
you can like compactly declare everything together.
Yeah.
You don't have to like import 10 things, you just import one uh, adapter. Okay.
Yeah. I think for libraries, like for reusable stuff that I want to publish later, I think I will probably expose just individual functions that people can collect as they want. But
I
yeah, for now,
think
yeah.
just in terms of how API is composed, can I pass that uh, name from server to that adapter, like that template, or do I only connect them once I use this? Once I kind of like mount the store to my component.
Yeah, you only use them in an actual store because this is an actual data source, and so it should only affect actual state. Uh, you could create a custom operator if you have logic that you want to share between sources, but um, that's RxJS stuff.
Right.
So,
I'm more thinking if imagine I wanna implement something like uh, okay, let me think. Just imagine that if I that name adapter
mhm,
has like a bump function, and
okay.
that function resets some timer. If I don't call that bump function often enough, it will like reset the state.
Um,
You can imagine
okay, so
that
like
is
it puts it
like a
off, so like
game.
debounce.
yeah, you click on it all the time, and like when you stop clicking, you lost, something like that.
Yeah, okay.
I can. What is the way for me to reuse that? Can I put it inside of this adapter? Because it's like it's asynchronous, like asynchronous logic, the synchronous
Yeah.
store, but it's a source of this thing is the store itself.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So in the redux observable, that would be like I'm writing with like map of like, hey, here's an action, and actions are just strings, so they're like not connected to anything in particular. So that's kind of like that's the whole kind of like redux. How do I call it? Like just a model, right? It's just like
Mhm.
the API is that you get an action, and what you do with it is like your problem. Because I saw like crazy stuff of like if this action has like this prefix or like this suffix, if it's like start
Mm.
request or something, and it could be like any
Yeah.
request, you want to like log it or something. So uh, it's extendable, but in not controlled way, if that makes sense. It's like, yeah, you can do whatever, and it's
Yeah.
easy if you do like a logger, right, or like DevTools, where it's like, yeah, I just want to write everything that is happening. But if I want to like reuse a logic, and if I want to have like two stores that have independent timer or like shared timer, that's probably like too complicated, and maybe like the people are should be blaming themselves if they're like coming up with this thing, but maybe not. Maybe that's like a thing that could happen.
Yeah. The I know how I would implement the actual behavior, but where it's like circular like that, but
Hmm.
to define a thing that's like reusable with the async logic, the way I would reuse async logic is with a custom ArcGIS operator, but um, yeah, I think I would like to hear more examples. And so if you, yeah, I'll think about what the example you said was and think about reusability in that context. But if you have another example, let me know and
Yeah, I'm
I'll
just
get
trying
back to
to
you on it.
figure out how this API is like. What are the parts, and what is the way that you can connect the parts? And so far is like, uh, I see this idea of like store that is aware of observables. And
Hmm.
does it just use like a redux-js, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so, and I can understand that it's like, hey, this is like our WebSocket server, or I guess if I'm connecting like a click event, that's
Hmm.
where I would just call like action creator, right? Like reverse name or concat name. That's I click it on clicks. Okay, you have like a.
Yeah. So the way I think about that is that when you create a store, it kind of creates its own internal sources.
Mm-hmm.
So you can define a source as independent, or you can use one of the built-in like included sources from the store.
Mm-hmm.
But once multiple things need to react to an event, you should have an independent source, and then both stores should reference that independent thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think so far the way that it looks like the API design is that there is like a really extendable way of writing everything, and there is like a kind of like a shortcuts on the way there. So it's like, yeah. If you like, if you only have one source that can reset it, yeah, just like put it as an action creator. And it's like,
Yeah.
if you if you go your list of like points on the way like back, it turns into like real clear kind of like hook, React hook, and that's where it kind of like makes perfect sense. For like here,
I
it's
hear you.
like, yeah, that's a great API. But once you write the same thing, now it's just like, now in order to change the name, you use like a redux-js. Is it like, I forgot.
That
Uh,
one was, here's where observables really came in, I think.
I think the next one is behavior subject or whatever the thing is.
Source.
Source. Okay.
Yeah.
So now you can write the same example, the number one, but if you like expand on every step, is like, yeah. So now on click, I don't call it reset. I call a source, and that source does reset. So now my reset is, I guess you have like a set, right? So like now now my set is like not default set, but like fully extended set. It's interesting, just like the ways that everything could be done like three different ways, and
Yeah.
different on different levels of like extensibility and simplicity.
Yeah.
And I
That's
think that's the problem with like Redux, right? It's like it's it introduces really simple primitives,
hmm
and you write a lot of boilerplate code. While you could have like more primitives, but then it's like, just you can do the same thing like 10 different times, or 10 different ways.
different ways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like a bit like overload of like, oh yeah, this is a shorthand of like this thing, or this is like
Yeah.
a, if now, because I need this, now if I need like reuse the source, right, I need to rewrite it as a more general case. So
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah. So
the
it's a trade-off,
answer for that,
but
but this is
I
what I see.
strongly prefer this one
Uh-huh.
um because it's, I don't like boilerplate, and but if you want something that can handle the most complex data flows in a reactive way, you need RxJS or an equivalent thing. So this is like the question of why use RxJS instead of just signals, because signals require you to do imperative updates in from scattered places like event handlers, um, because uh, signals don't react to events. You can have like derived states, like memos that that come from other signals, but to have two signals react to the same event, you can't do that, and that's why Ryan
I
Carniato
mean, you would have to
includes
introduce like a third signal, right?
um it's signals are best for states and ArcGIS is best for events,
Uh-huh.
although signals can be extended to handle events too. So Ryan Carniato, he created an integration with ArcGIS and SolidJS specifically because he knew that there are two different ways of doing reactivity. One is more like event based, the other is more about state synchronization. So if you like reactivity, like the whole point of reactivity isn't performance or um, simplicity, even as far as like re-rendering with React and people complaining and saying how SolidJS is so much easier with its reactivity. The point is code organization, because we could always just do simple event handlers ever since jQuery, ever since vanilla JavaScript. But what we want is declarative DOMs. And so that's reactivity at the layer of the UI. And signals give you declarative derived state. They give you from the point state is set all the way down to the DOM, it gives you declarative code. But whenever there's asynchronous events happening, like debounces and stuff, you have to, because those relationships are complicated, you need utilities to handle them in a declarative way. So all the RxJS operators are actually essential for declarative async code. So yeah, that's why you would use RxJS. But
Uh,
yeah.
Yeah, by the way, can you show like Angular, like how does how does it compare to Angular code? Just
Um,
on this like tab where you have Angular.
oh, yeah.
I'm
So I'm
just
not showing
wondering if
all of
it's
it.
like simpler or more
Let's see.
complicated.
So this is basically a whole component in React.
Yeah.
And in Angular, I'm only showing the class. I'm not showing the decorator um, or the metadata where this template actually is stored in. So it's sort of like a simplified view of it. We can look at the same example here. So this is the first one in Angular. This is React.
Hmm.
So Angular, React.
Yeah. So let's go through the Angular one just so I can feel it, like you said. Does that feel Reacty? And I wonder if does that feel kind of like more angularly?
Well, this Angular is moving more towards functional, and there are people who hate it, but this is using one of the tools that's kind of more functional. Normally, you'd have a constructor and you do this dot adapt, but this is calling basically like a hook under the hood. So it's it's mostly Angular feeling, but it's kind of more functional too. But
Okay, so where does it lead into like number 5 or 6? What we were looking
oh,
at
what is it down
React?
here? Let's look
Uh-huh.
at 5. Okay, so I define the adapter as a class property.
Uh-huh.
Same with the source, both sources,
Uh-huh.
and they have one store here and another store here. And then in the template, you reference the store, and then you don't use the proxy object. You just get the observable directly because it's different in
Okay,
Angular.
observable directly. So
Yeah.
your uh hmm. Okay,
So the
so
proxy
here when you
object.
do adapt,
Mhm.
you are returning one thing instead of two things like in React.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Adapt.
is it
That's
like two-way data binding or what's the what's the story there?
no, it's a store just like here. So,
So
so
basically, you don't have that proxy, like read-only proxy
yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. So I started with just stores,
Hmm.
and then I created this tuple in React with like not in this one with the proxy because I realized that uh, in React, you want to just use state directly. You don't want to wrap everything in like subscriptions or whatever. There's another way to do this. And so you can get an observable, and I have a hook that's just called use observable. So you can grab, it's like use selector. So you can just grab the state from the observable directly. And yeah, so that was the old way I did it. And it still might be okay to use because of efficiency. Um, because this is going to cause the component to re-render anytime this main state changes. If you have a complicated state object, you might not want that.
Hmm. But now,
So
um, if you didn't have a name one, but you had like a selector that just like name one dot yelling or like length, right? So it's like
yeah.
it could be changing like less frequently than the store itself.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. If you have like a, yeah, even if it's a simple thing, it
Yeah, because
could be
this
derived.
like signals proposal that is happening right now with this Preact, they have like dot value or something like that, which is like
Hmm.
a getter. So it's a function that is called, so you know what exactly got called. So like if only Yelp name got called during the render, you know that you only need to subscribe to that one instead of like all of them.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, Nicola said that after checking it out, okay, after checking it out, I really like this thing. So you already have a
Cool.
fan.
All right. That's great. Uh, yeah,
Uh,
I'm
in
really
this
curious.
in the YouTube description, I already have like your like YouTube channel. I should add like your Twitter and other stuff. Okay,
Cool.
we got our like Zoom warning again. Let's try to figure out how to bring this to the close. I think Angular API is a bit simpler because there is two-way
Just
data
one
binding,
thing.
but that's kind of like
It actually isn't two-way data binding though. It's it's an object that has observables and functions on it,
right.
but there's no actual two-way
Yeah, yeah,
data
yeah. I,
binding.
I know what you mean. It just it doesn't separate reads
It
from writes.
feels like they're
Yeah,
going through the same thing, is what you're
yeah,
saying.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
so that's like a bit nicer, and it makes sense that in like in Angular, if you have a store, it's easy to kind of like subscribe to a part of the store, while
Yeah.
in React that would require a bit more ceremony of like
Mm-hmm.
having like two separate lines, right? So one
Yep.
to connect to the store and the other is to I think
Use
the way
observable.
that
Yeah.
it's different in Redux is that you don't have to create a store inside components. It's already kind of like declared somewhere as a singleton, and you only basically, if we're talking about like Atom and use Atom, you do Atom somewhere in a file that is called like store.ts, and you use Atom inside of component. But here you're doing kind of like two things at the same time. It's like you're declaring the store and you're also using the store. That's why it's like you are either kind of like overloading this use adapter hook, or you're introducing two hooks, which is cool if the hook that you're introducing is kind of like working on selector levels, right? So like if we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about Redux, that would be like use selector name dot yelling name, use
Mm-hmm.
selector name dot like length or something like that, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
use action or like dispatcher, right? Dispatcher and like name dot reverse the name or like reset. uh, okay, so my take so far is it looks cool. I just like I see how it is more compact than Redux alternative,
Mm-hmm.
and I I can imagine that it's uh, if you know redux-js, it just like you need to introduce like less things. It's just yeah, sure, just use observable as like event source
Yeah.
and all of that stuff. That makes sense. Uh, I still feel like there's probably like a nicer API for all of
Mm-hmm.
this somewhere. It's just not immediately obvious like where or how would I
Okay.
wanted to see that.
So I need to do more exploration with Jotai and compare and see, because you're used to Jotai, so that's like your standard, right? Uh, and yeah,
Yeah, and in
I
terms
don't.
of like
Yeah.
trying to write the same, so what would you consider kind of like the more challenging part that is uh, that you think is would be like tricky to write in kind of like other frameworks?
Other other state management libraries, the tricky part.
Uh, right. So you were saying we can try like or writing those
Oh,
the same code snippets in like in Jotai. So what
yeah,
would
and
you say like
handles.
the tricky parts?
Um, I
Probably like
think
a sync logic, right? How to
yes.
connect it to the server.
Although did look pretty cool, the observable utility that Jotai had. But yeah, when you have one stream of async behavior and multiple things need to react to it,
Right. So in
that's the main thing.
Jotai, the tricky part is going to be like the following. So you have this global timer, and it's like in Jotai, you can only have state if your atom is mounted somewhere. So what you do in Jotai is you sometimes create components that are like the only goal that that they are there is just to be mounted.
Uh,
Otherwise your like state is not going to be preserved or something. If you like close something and like open it, it's like it's unmounted it and mounts it again. So now you
yeah,
need to have some kind of like component that is like the only thing that it does is kind of like stores the value, keeps the reference kind of to it.
yeah, yeah. There's a little bit of that with this.
And
The thing
here,
about this is you have to subscribe to the state or it never gets initialized.
sure. And here, what I'm thinking of, like this name from the server is like, when do I call this timer? Do I just create a like
Oh,
this
you don't.
holder component that is that is
That's
like
what I.
uh
Well, what? Why? Okay,
so in
why do you want this to
signals
run?
they don't signals are not connected to the component tree. You can
Right.
create a signal that is just console login like every second. There's like it doesn't have to be, but Jotai values like you can create an atom wherever whenever you want, but if you want to store some state in it, you need to mount it, and it's like the tricky part when I look at this code is like if I want to write it in Jotai, is like where the amount is where the amount is timer, and it's like do I introduce a separate kind of like signal or Jota atom that is like
Oh.
responsible for like mounting and unmounting, and so I think that's where this like async orchestration is like a real I think.
Mm,
Okay, we have a few
okay.
more questions and just a few more minutes. Can you use StateAdapt for translation libraries? Not sure what it means.
Translation libraries?
Yeah.
I would assume so, but which one? I don't know.
It's like a pipe. I like. Uh, it's like a pipe around stores. I really like this thing. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I actually called it Smart Store in the first version because it's like dumb components, smart components. It's
Uh-huh.
like a store that knows where its data comes from. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Uh, I need to get to sleep.
Yeah, me too.
uh, I think like there is a second episode in order to kind of like to explore APIs a bit more, and it's really interesting. I will try to play with it, especially if you have like a solid or yeah, basically solid. Especially if you have solid in works. And do you want to say anything? We have like 1 minute left.
No, I'll send you the link for the solid demo I have. And yeah, you probably may have already seen it, but I've got it here basically from adapt instead of use adapt or use store or whatever. Anyway, but yeah, this was really fun, and I will definitely look a lot more into Jotai. It's more capable than I remember my first impression seeing it as, but and I really like the functional approach. So yeah, this was fun. I will look more into Jotai and do a couple of comparison projects. And yeah, I'd love to talk again about this. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And yes, let's try to do it more often. I don't know how to exit Zoom now, but uh, okay. Thanks everyone who was in the chat, and I had some smart thing to say in the end, but I already forgot, so I will get some sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, my brain is asleep already.
Okay, cool. Cool.
All right,
Bye.
thanks.
Sure.
Bye.